I'm Tammy Kolda, an applied mathematician, and this is Unlocking LaTeX Graphics. On this channel, I present tutorials on using TXE and PGFPLOTS. The videos on this channel are based on my book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, as well as some bonus materials. Today, we're working with a horizontal group plot, and I'll show how to share the y-axis label and tick marks across the row so they only appear on the leftmost subplot. This can enable you to squeeze more into less space. I'll also talk a little bit about consistent y-axis limits and padding. This is the horizontal companion to an earlier episode on a vertical group plot with a shared x-axis. I'll link that in the show notes. Let's get started. Here in the preamble, I'm loading parskip to avoid paragraph indentation and hyperref to link the author name back to this YouTube channel. The key package is PGFPLOTS. For this episode, we also need the PGFPLOTS Groupplot library. The PGFPLOTS set block in the preamble sets 3 options I recommend as defaults at the top of any document that uses PGFPLOTS. I'm setting the compatibility to 1.18, which is the latest version as of the time of this recording. The option scale only axis makes it so that the width and height you specify is the actual height of the axes rather than adding some extra space. The every axis title shift equals 3-point option reduces the normal 6-point gap between the axis box and its title. Inside the document, I have a citation to my own paper from which the figure is adapted. I'll link the paper in the show notes. Our starting point is a group plot that I've already pasted here. Inside the TXE picture, the first thing I'm doing is having a PGFPLOTS set block that sets up a bunch of styles. This could potentially go into the document preamble if all the figures had the same setup. We specify that the data files have comma separators because that's just how my data files are. We specify the font sizes for various parts of the figure. We change the default legend position to northwest from the usual northeast. And then we specify some plot styles. We set every axis plot to have a default style, which is thick. We're also setting every single mark to be solid and to be slightly transparent with a fill opacity of 0.3. Then I'm defining 3 different styles named direct, decoupled, and PCG. And then we're going to use those in our plots later. Next, we have the group plot itself. I'm using group slash today instead of the group style that groups all the options together inside curly braces. This is going to enable me to just add group options one by one in sort of an ordered way. You can do it either way. I'm setting the group size to be 2 by 1, which means that I want 2 subplots in the same row. Next, I specify the width and height, and that will apply to everything in the group plot. I'm also setting the y-axis to be log scale. And finally, I set the labels for the x and y axes. So these general options will apply to all the subplots since they're set at the group plot level. The 2 subplots are here and here. They each load data from comma-separated text files, use the plot styles we defined above, and each have their own title and legend. If I compile that, let's see the problem. Here, this y-axis label time sec appears on both subplots, and there's not enough space for it on the second plot. So we're going to work on fixing that. There are a couple of fixes to this. So one is we could only specify the X label on the first subplot and leave it off the second subplot, and then we wouldn't see it twice. Another approach is to just add more horizontal space between these 2 subplots so there's room for these labels. So the way I can do that is I go back up to the group plot options and I'll paste group/horizontal sep equals 1.5 centimeters. Increasing the horizontal separation assumes that you actually have enough space to do that. If you don't, we can try a different approach. Since all the y-axes have the same label, we can, instead of increasing the horizontal separation, just say, let's put all the y labels at edge left. So that means you only do it once for the whole row. You can see when I compile that, the second copy has disappeared and we went back to the default space between axes of 1 centimeter. The next problem is that each subplot is automatically scaling its y-axis independently. So we actually have different limits. If you're comparing plots side by side, you may want them to share the same scale, in which case then you can share the same labels on your ticks. So let's first set ymin and ymax to be the same for both plots. Unfortunately, there's no way to do this automatically. You have to do it manually. So I went in to my data files and looked at what were the smallest and largest values. And so ymin was 1.5 and ymax was 5175. Now that works, but now we're up to the edge of the boundary. Maybe that's fine, but typically we want to have a little extra space. The good news is that both plots are now using the same Y scale, so you can directly compare these timings. Now I could make a little bit of a buffer, more like the default that PGFPLOTS does when it determines the axes limits. And I'm going to do that by saying enlarge the Y limit to be 10%. So this will add 10% padding to the top and the bottom. The great part about this enlarge Y limits is that it works great in log scale. I don't have to do the math to figure out what the padded limit should be. Now that we have common y-axis limits, we can share the y-axis tick labels. So I'm going to paste in group yticklabels at edge left. When I do that, now we only have the tick labels on the first plot. It will take off other tick labels even if they don't match. So it's up to you to make sure that they genuinely are matching before you apply this option. Now that neither the y-axis label nor the tick numbers occupy horizontal space on the right subplot, the default gap between the plots is arguably too wide. So we can tighten that up by setting the horizontal separation to just 0.5 centimeter. Now we have a very nice looking group plot with shared y-axis labels and tick marks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on shared y-axis labels and tick marks in a horizontal group plot. We started with the basic horizontal group plot where the y-axis label and tick numbers were on both subplots. If you want to keep those explicitly, you can just add more horizontal space between the subplots. But another option is to share the labels. So to recap, we moved the y-axis label to the left edge using ylabels at equals edge left. We set consistent y-axis limits across both subplots using ymin and ymax. We added proportional padding using enlarge y limits, which works even for log scale plots. We then moved the tick labels to the left edge with yticklabels at equals edge left. And finally, we tightened the horizontal space to take back all that extra space that we've reclaimed. I include a link to the overleaf document I created today in the show notes. If you found this helpful or interesting, please click like or subscribe. If you have TXE or PGFPLOTS questions, please post them in the comments. If you want to learn more, please check out the other videos. I also have a book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, available for purchase at major book retailers. Thanks for watching.